Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. So glad to have any and all of you with us. Welcome from LinkedIn as well as Facebook and YouTube. We're looking forward to a good hour of conversation, engagement on topic of EQ. And so, Anton, you want to roll it out for us?
Sure. Just gonna start continuing on our journey of the different components of stress management we offer for companies. And people are like, well, EQ, what does that have to do with stress management, right? That's not typically what people talk about. But think about in your life how often you've made poor choices, and reacted to something or said something wrong in so many different contexts that it caused you a lot of work. And one of the biggest things that we focus at Prospective Force, we help tech companies to really retain their talent, but managing their stress, their systems, processes. And how often did it happen that you did that and then you had to go back and fix it? And then you had to, do so much work to backpedal, or you ruined relationships. There's so much stress that gets created from it. So we are doing the best we can to expand the idea of what stress means. It's not just something that the boss is yelling in your head. Inefficiency is a huge stressor on companies. But when you are not emotionally intelligent, it's not just you're not efficient, you're going in the opposite direction, even getting even worse than just being inefficient. You're causing problems, you're causing, digging yourself a deeper hole all the time. So we're going to dive into it. If you pop the agenda up, I actually filled it out today. As always, we start with HR news of the week, and we'll dive into an article I read about Walmart loses $125 million employment lawsuit. And we'll talk about what happened and some details behind it and some shocking factors that I found out behind that $125 million number. Then we'll come into, it's not just about self-awareness, how EQ, people really over-index on self-awareness, but what next, right? Now I'm self-aware. It doesn't mean you have emotional intelligence. You just have one component. You're just self-aware. We'll talk about the barriers to good EQ, kind of what gets in the way of it. And then we'll get into components of emotional intelligence, right? The four main pillars. There's been many subcomponents that people have gotten into. I still believe in the basic four, keeps things simple. And then we'll get into how to teach yourself and others to have better emotional intelligence. Let's get into that article.
Okay.
Yeah, so now we're looking at, you guys, as always, I provide the link down below. So if you guys want to, take a screenshot and then read it later, feel free. I want to make sure we give credit to Lisa, who wrote this. But a plaintiff won a disability discrimination lawsuit filed on behalf of a former Walmart employee with Down syndrome. And the backstory behind it is this employee had their schedule shift changed, and they couldn't, it didn't work for them and their disability situation, and they asked to come back to their old shift. And Walmart, denied it, ended up firing them, and there was a big lawsuit, and obviously the plaintiff won. But the problem is the compensatory and punitive damages will be reduced to only $300,000, which is the maximum award allowed under the Americans with Disability Act. So this team member is only getting $150,000, and the other $150,000 will be, just punitive damages by the ADA. And to me, that was a shocker. When you see the sticker price and you go $125 million awarded by a jury, but then only $300,000 is getting paid out because of this law for companies over 500 employees. And I understand, trying to protect the company from being sued all the time and that kind of stuff. But in this case, I really thought that we needed to, even $125 million for Walmart is a slap on the wrist. Let's be real. It's really nothing to them. But at the bare minimum, we should have kept the slap on the wrist. That's my thing. Send a message and make sure that never happens, because I feel like I've heard a few of these lawsuits in the past and they keep happening, right? Because if you think about how many employees they have and how much wrong they could do and only get away, only get in trouble so often, because not everybody brings up lawsuits. I don't think it sets a good example, but I do understand protecting the company. I just think we need to find better balance and maybe increase that number. So what's your thoughts on overall situation, Kev?
Yeah, I think that your key word there is balance. By the way, welcome, Pushkar. Glad to have you with us. Remember, folks, to tell us where you're joining from and let us know you're there. And if you hear or see things you like, be sure and use the react button to help get more people involved. So thanks for that. Wow, having, being a business owner and having had employees before, I understand the need for consistency and so on in scheduling and the like, but we also need to understand, and this is part of EQ, and kind of the inconvenient part of it is that we've got to consider that we don't do a one-size-fits-all with things. Now, again, on the balance side of that, I know that there has to be a consideration here in the U.S. anyway about EEOC. The whole concept, if I do it one for one, I've got to do it for all. It's a murky spot, but I also am with you that when you say they're awarded 125 million, and when it all boils down to 300,000, why? I guess my ignorance of the system. What does the 125 million have to do with anything if all that effectively happens is a $300,000 penalty? Yeah, that seems a bit confusing.
My jaw literally dropped, man. Like when I read the I saw the news and I was like, I'm kind of used to seeing that, but when I dove into detail, which I don't normally on this kind of stuff, I was really blown away by the rule of max out of 300,000. Man, that's crazy.
Welcome, Nivara. Glad to have you back. Nivara's been with us before. Remember to feel free also to make comments in the comments area, ask questions, share your thoughts. But yeah, I think, as an HR person, it's something that we probably do well to be informed of. What are the risks and not, and then obviously look at ways to stay within compliance, but at the same time treat employees as human beings. And that's a tough one. And I think that has to be handled on a case-by-case basis. And that's one of the reasons I like that we come in and we assess and we tailor to each situation. Obviously, part of what we want to make sure of is not to put companies and organizations in jeopardy by causing undue risk over policies. So,
well, yeah, because I like how you mentioned the balance as always, and you can't just protect employees because there's also a bigger picture. Some companies could get hit, obviously not Walmart, but some companies could go out of business for that kind of lawsuit. And what would happen then? Well, there's a lot of employees that wouldn't have jobs all of a sudden. There's a lot of families that wouldn't have food on their table. So really, when we discuss these things, and this is part of EQ from HR standpoint, is really looking at both sides and getting away further from the problem, the tip of our nose, and going, what's the bigger picture? I get into arguments about this a lot, people that really over-index on the employee side. And I'm like, but you have to remember a business that has to stay in business or a lot more people are hurt.
Well, and an example in recent history that I think of that indicates where, we had people cut off their nose to spite their face kind of situation was Eastern Airlines, and what happened with them take over by a new leader and all this. And I know that a lot of employees didn't like what was done, but ultimately their choice to strike and do all that killed the company and everybody lost their job. So it's an interesting challenge out there, and it can't be just one-sided view of it.
And that leads perfectly into the next slide, right? We're moving now into our main presentation of self-awareness. For those that are just joining right now, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, and really that's part of the component that we apply to stress management for companies. It's a really important component. But this is kind of on our life side, because this is, leadership belongs there as well, but this is more from an individual standpoint, and this is within our 10% better brand. If you don't know, we have 3 separate brands. We have 10% Fitter, which is kind of our health brand, which is how people are, right? That internal state of how they are. then life is the 10% better brand, and that's what they are, right? Everything from father to mother to employee to all these different things. And then the 10% impact is our leadership and work brand. And we have right now, we're currently going through the 10% better side. So EQ is not just about self-awareness. I see this misunderstood a lot, or maybe just people stop there too much. And it's one thing to understand what you're doing wrong or what you're doing right, but it's a whole other thing to change it and apply different things and adjust to your environment. Just because I know I'm an a-hole in an environment doesn't mean that I have good emotional intelligence. I'm just aware of being a bad person in certain situations. Now, if I would have become self-managed, which we'll talk about components in a second, I would understand I either need to get out of that environment or change how I am if I'm not, if I can't change the environment, because I can't operate as a bad person or an a-hole, excuse me, I don't want to say the bad word, but in that situation. So what are your thoughts about, this part where people tend to kind of stop at self-awareness, or have you experienced the same thing, Kevin?
Yeah, I think you're right on target with the concept of stopping. We have raised the issue enough, I think, that people are beginning to consider self-awareness. But unfortunately, it's like, okay, I've checked off my self-awareness box, and then I'll just go on and do what I already do. And for those that know me, know that I am really pushing to encourage people to gain wisdom. And the reason I think we have a lot of people that lack wisdom is that we have made it acceptable to stop with the first part of the journey, and that's gaining knowledge. Okay, we we celebrate gaining knowledge. We even call it power. But if you get a bunch of knowledge and you can't do anything with it and you apply it in the wrong way, you're not any better off. Same way with EQ. You become self-aware and you identify challenges, issues, but then you go on and keep doing what you were doing. That's a big problem. You can check the box, but it hasn't changed a thing or helped in any way.
The other aspect of self-awareness is flawed self-awareness, right? Sometimes we feel that we're self-aware because we've identified certain things and we say certain things, but is it accurate, right? How much time do we spend investigating it, or is it somebody else's awareness of us that became self-awareness? You talk about this a lot, people wearing a big L on their head, right? And that becomes part of their self-awareness, but an inaccurate part. It's just somebody has put that inside of them and they've accepted it so much now that they actually feel like they're self-aware about being a loser, and they really are not.
Right. Welcome, Ashfaq. Glad to have you again. Appreciate you joining us. Ashfaq has been here before. And welcome, Richard. Glad to have you today. This self-aware is part of the process. But like you said, Anton, if we are self-aware only to a surface point and we go, I see what people mean, I am a loser. No, it's not the case. One of my favorite quotes is that we have value that is great value above everything else, and we didn't earn it, so we can't lose it. Others didn't give it to us, so they can't take it away. And it's given us by our Creator, and He won't take it away. So don't let your self-awareness just become a tool to beat yourself up and try and confirm a negative narrative. We talked last week about our narratives, and unfortunately, some people stick here, and then their narrative becomes, I'm a loser. Welcome, Panda. Glad to have you with us from India. And here's a salient comment from Richard, boy, this happens all too often, and that is, it's like saying you're sorry and doing nothing to change the behavior. Pretty hollow. You can be self-aware, and just because you're a let's just say less than what you should be, and you're knowing that doesn't do any good if you don't do something to grow and change in that behavior or that attitude, whatever.
As much as I try to run away from it, we're emotional creatures. And the point that I'm making with this is sometimes our emotion create the wrong self-awareness. Self-awareness is a logical thing, but when our emotions are high, or if it's funny, there's a saying that goes, if somebody says you have a tail, doesn't mean you have a tail. If two people say you have a tail, look back, something's wagging, right? So get second opinion. But sometimes there's one person that hits so hard emotionally that they created this entire picture of wrong self-awareness just from one comment, one instance, one situation, whatever it may be, but it had nothing to do with you. It had to do with them not being emotionally intelligent, them having issues, and passing it on to you. And then we take that on and start wearing that hat. The other side of it that I see people struggle is not necessarily all the way to the loser standpoint, but where I see people lack self-awareness on the positive side is really high achievers, especially people that were raised with a very high bar where, you know, schools, parents, everybody expected a lot, and they started to expect a lot from themselves. It's a great quality to have because you do become a high achiever. But where that hurts you is ability to be self-aware in your strengths. You know, I am one of those people. I'm speaking from experience on this. And I am terrible at hearing people giving me compliments about strength. I'm like, oh, move on. Let's get to the bad stuff so I can learn more, so I can get better. But there's so many negative ramifications that come from that hurt us and also hurt those around us. Because I'm that way. Guess how I'm going to be with my team? I'm going to be the same way with my team as a leader and not praise them enough and not do anything enough because I'm carrying the same bar for them, an unrealistic bar for them, as I am carrying for myself.
There's a principle, and it's related to EQ. Okay. And tried and true, been around a long time. And it's actually in the form of a commandment, and that says, love others. Okay. We love your neighbor as yourself. We get the love your neighbor part, but there is a yourself part. And the practical application of EQ is that you cannot love others. You cannot accept and recognize and value others if you're not willing to love, accept, and recognize who you are created to be. If you don't do that, you're going to, as Anton said, as a leader, you're going to set a bad example. You're going to perpetuate the big loser mindset. And I will tell you, any of you working with teams, I can, with probably 99% confidence, tell you the people you are working with on your team, at least at a minimum, have come to you labeled, okay, in some form or fashion, at a minimum. Again, I don't make emphatic statements too often, but I will tell you that at a minimum, our education system is labeling most everyone that goes through it as a loser one way or another. Welcome, Hakan. If I mispronounce your name, please correct me. Dr. Rajput, thank you. Glad to have you. Anton, we got a question. This is going to be a goodie, but hey, that's what it's all about, right? Comes from Pushkar. He says, how could you create more balance in your life? Want to jump on that one to start?
Oh, I can. Yeah. So, you know, Pushkar, it's a great question. And it's a really broad one. So I'm going to try to answer it best I can. If you want to take a different angle, go ahead and ask a follow-up question. But what it boils down to is understanding all components of yourself. It starts with that, right? It's really being self-aware about all different parts. And we get into this with our life plan part, which is about 6 weeks away. But I'll give you a little bit of a high-level overview. And I used to be a very successful manager. Well, it used to be the golden goose of my company. You know, they would recruit me, they would send me to different places, 7 promotions in 7 years, like everything was great. But that was the only thing I focused on in life. I had kids, I had a wife, you know, I forgot about my health. I went from being extremely healthy to somebody that was barely getting by while working in the health industry. I just gave everything to my work. I over-indexed on one thing. So my advice to start finding balance is identifying all important components to who you are. Understanding what all those are, defining success within them, and then most importantly, regularly checking in to see how you're doing, because you're not just your job, you're not just a parent, right? And to the point of self-awareness, Kevin's talking about with these labels, make sure you didn't mislabel yourself somewhere. And I'll give you guys a story about education on this. I mislabeled myself as a poor student. I love learning, but I mislabeled myself as a poor student. Why? Because initially when I went to school from 2008 to 2012, my GPA was 1.4. And that's like a CD level, like an awful student. I just wasn't engaged. What I was learning wasn't what I wanted to do, but I never realized that because somebody put it in my head. You got to go for finance. That's the job that's going to make you happy. That's what's going to do for you. And once again, I just didn't understand that component of myself. I came back to school with, 2 years ago and started back up in 2019. I finished with 3.8 for the 70 or for 42 credits I had left in 9 months, which is like an overload like never before. What's the difference? And now I'm getting my MBA in 2 weeks with a 3.6. What's the difference? I wasn't a bad student. I just didn't have my passion. So I didn't really understand all those components of myself and how one fits into the other. And if you can do that, that'll start to create the journey that will lead you to balance.
Yeah, Dr. Rashford, thanks for letting us know that you're joining from India. And Hawk, I appreciate the the help on your name and an interesting story about the background of that. Thanks for sharing. Jimmy, welcome. Glad to have you. Jimmy actually has been a guest on the show in the past, so appreciate you being here. One of the things that talking about balance, of course, I love the term balance and I think it's critical, but another way of looking at it that maybe helps is because a lot of people really don't understand what balance is, and that's another topic for another day. But what we talk about as we coach with people is congruence, okay? And that is intermeshing our life and our work because they have to be intermeshed. You can't separate them. My generation worked very hard at separating them, and we were pretty effective at doing it, but not without consequences that we didn't understand at the time and now see occurring with our generation. So, and the other one, to answer your question, my mind just went blank on who asked the question. The Pushkar, sorry, Pushkar, senior moment, is prioritizing. Okay, and we have some information, and in fact, if you'll go to my profile, we've got a graphic on my profile that talks about how to prioritize. Short version is, if you can't control it and you can't influence it, then it's not a priority. And so finding your priority helps to be able to develop the idea of congruence. And because once you understand what your real priorities are, then you can mesh everything around those priorities.
I think there's a couple more questions here. Does EQ work in all circumstances from Ashfac, and are these EQ and IQ the same? So for all circumstances, and I'll tell you where I've shifted my belief around this. I used to think that EQ was a weakness. You could show weakness by being very emotionally intelligent. Means that you won't raise your voice, means that you won't take on that dominant style of leadership or dominant style of communication. Dominance and EQ don't mix. It's not the point. But as I've gotten older, I realized that just because I was effective through dominance doesn't mean I was as effective as I would have been had I maintained good emotional intelligence. It doesn't mean weakness. You can be firm, you can be direct with emotional intelligence, but delivery of that information matters. The place that you come from matters. And then to answer the other one, that with EQ and IQ, actually, Kev, why don't you take the EQ work in all circumstances? Anything to add to that?
The short answer is yes. It needs to be present regardless. Now, whether so yes, the answer to that question, and then I'll let you jump in on the next one, Anton. And then I'll chime in the follow up to the yes. That
why don't you open it up, man? I'll go first last time.
And again, just so we can share. I like people to see things. It's the teacher in me, sorry, but I know that helps to add to our learning. Yeah, EQ and IQ are not the same. They are related. And I guess I'm going to have to at least go into a little bit about balance. And from my perspective, EQ and IQ are two balancing positive characteristics. Okay. IQ has to do with logic and reason and so on. And that's very important that we develop the ability to work through things logically and to approach them informed and intelligent. But if that's all you do, you will become, in the work environment, you're going to become that boss that everyone dislikes, because people are going to see you as not caring, and it will be a real problem. In fact, I got to tell on myself here, and real life examples go a lot longer. And that is an eye-opener for me as a leader was back when I first started teaching. I was applying the principles of leadership in that environment. And part of that was asking feedback from my students, which was not required. It was part of a standard that I was meeting beyond the basic. Short version is, when I approached my teaching, I approached these young people as I would my own children, with that depth of care, concern. But when I did this feedback survey with my students, get this, I mean, you're talking about significance statistically, 80% of the students that responded expressed the thought that I didn't care about them. And it about blew me out of the water. And so what I had done is I had applied IQ, a lot of logical approach, but not EQ. And what was interesting is, when in that situation, the word on the street, the mindset among my students was, Mr. Ward, watch your back. And in fact, I even got my life threatened. Once I brought in the balance of EQ, and if you want to read about some of that, there's some articles on my profile, so I won't go into that. But when I brought in EQ, the attitude among the students changed dramatically, to a point that it went from "you better watch your back" to "Mr. Ward, we've got your back." And that shift became a remarkable pivot in my leadership of that group. And it's part of why I do what I do. So balance, short version, is having a firm grasp on both extremes of two opposing positive characteristics, and being able to shift between the two at any given moment. As a leader, if you can't go either towards IQ or more towards EQ, you need to grow in that regard, because in every situation, you're going to need to be able to make that shift and hold that balance. So it's not one or the other, it's both.
Yeah, and that's the thing that happens, as a comment about it earlier, that's an ongoing debate, and it is. And because people try to put them on each side of the, different sides of the conversation, and I'm like, they're not. Balance doesn't mean equal. At different parts, you're going to need different things. If you're an analyst that only works by yourself at a computer all the time, you don't engage with people, you need a lot more EQ in that specific situation. But it doesn't mean you're not going to get out of your analyst role and go speak with people outside, engage with your kids, your family, your loved ones, whatever it may be, your friends, where you may need more EQ. But the word we use, congruence, that they have to find a way to bring those two together, have them function together. And a lot of times I look at, to your story, Kev, teaching, I look at leaders really focusing too much on IQ because they want efficiency. And I say, I prefer effectiveness, because you can be efficiently ineffective. And that's what you were, Kev. You were efficiently ineffective because you weren't connecting with your students until you were able to learn the gaps and correct those gaps. And it started with self-awareness.
Well, your statement there, Anton, is so spot on to what we're talking about. Efficiently ineffective. That is the pressure we're under now in current terms because of technology, that we are being pushed to be efficient, but to a point where we're becoming ineffective. Let me share one comment from Hawk that is a good segue. And he says the EQ-IQ debate has been raging in Mensa land for years. No, EQ does not exist. It is a trait. Not intelligent is one extreme. I think that it is only another label. Emotional awareness is also always important. Yeah, I don't. You won't get an argument out of us on that one, Hawk.
Okay. So now we're gonna hit this a few times, 3 times, I think. And 4 times. Sorry. So this slide, it makes no sense probably right now, but this is one of the biggest obstacles to good emotional intelligence. And it's not lack of desire, it's stress. And this is why we're talking about this, human SOS, our system's built all around helping people manage stress, be individuals, teams, doesn't matter. But what happens, I'll give you guys a little bit of a backstory on this slide. You have 3 phases kind of that happen within your body with stress. This comes from polyvagal nerve theory. If you want to nerd out and get deeper into it, it's a nerve that exists in our back, in the back of our brain, but pituitary gland, that allows us to switch from parasympathetic nervous system, which is a relaxed and calm one, the green area, to sympathetic nervous system, which is go, action, survival area, right? So you can see when we're in the parasympathetic mode, we are full of joy. We're open to experiences. We feel safe. We have compassion. We have mindfulness. We have curiosity. Most of those things are directly EQ related. Now, there is an in between. We start getting to the orange, where we get to focus, awareness, motivation, charisma, confidence, creativity. Most people that are really relaxed don't have a ton of charisma, guys. You need a little bit of that sympathetic nervous system to kick in to find that ability to, even creativity, confidence, all those things. But the problem is that we're supposed to go up into sympathetic nervous system through stress, through, whatever it may be, the situation. And then when it's over, come back down. Similarly, when a lion would chase you back in the day in prehistoric times, you run away from it, you come back down, you recover. So next time a lion chases you, you're able to perform just as well. Well, society has kind of not paid attention to this enough. We don't consider this our primal way that our brain is set up and how it impacts us. So when we start to not come back down, when we start to not recover from stress, we use the analogy, your bucket's overflowing, right? And if you've never seen us talk about it, we will in the future. But then you start to get into the red, and you start to get into aggression, fear, and poor decisions. Notice there's still kind of a crossover. You have to have discipline. You have to have drive. No longer motivation exists. Now discipline comes in order to execute something. But then eventually it gets into burnout, shame, depression, no discipline, hopelessness, right? So the top 3 lines, that destroys emotional intelligence. And people end up living there. It's that free mode that they just don't realize. Why? Contrast, lack of contrast. It took so long to get there because it wasn't any particular event that caused them to get to that place. It was that slow drip of stress, slow drip of burnout that got them to that point. And now they forgot what good feels like. I've gone through that myself this year with all the stuff that I try to take on over the last 2 years. And I know it, guys. I know this stuff, and I still fell, victim to this issue. Most people don't even know it, so I don't blame people for this. But this is the biggest roadblock to your emotional intelligence. Your brain becomes a caged animal in these kind of situations when you're there for too long. And I don't know about you, I'm designed to be a powerful human that thinks with my logic and it just doesn't react all the time, doesn't assume things in conversations, is not fear-based. But if you are burnt out and stressed out, It doesn't matter the amount of mental, emotional intelligence work you're going to do. It's the chemicals inside you that are driving you away from it.
Yeah, when you're in the red and blue zone, you really aren't good at IQ or EQ. You are just a mass of mess. And what's, I think, unfortunate, and that culturally we have defined success as living in the red zone all the time. Mm-hmm. And that is not the way we're designed. It is not the way we're made. Our body, our mind, our emotions, even our spirit is not designed to live in that world constantly. To me, one of the biggest examples, and Anton's much more informed of this than I am, but one of the things I learned years ago is I watched friends that met all the criterion for being healthy. They were active, they were lean, they were all of this, but they were falling over dead with heart attacks. And I'm going, okay, this doesn't fit what we're being told. Eat right, exercise well, and you'll be great. Well, there's a component that is left out in that whole concept, and that component is coming back down. And because when we're in the red zone, and I'll probably butcher this, Anton, but I'm gonna give it a shot. When you're in the red zone, there's chemically things happening in your body. And, one of the buggers that the medical community has latched onto is cholesterol. And we've got all kinds of medications and stuff. And we say, well, the way you avoid cholesterol is eat right. That is only a small part, because when you're in this red zone, along with other hormones and enzymes your body's producing, one of the things it's doing is pumping cholesterol into your system. Cortisol.
Yeah.
Okay. And during that is what causes people that seemingly are otherwise healthy have heart and circulatory problems, because they're staying in this red zone. Mm-hmm. And you can do all the other things right, but if you live here, your life's going to be short.
And people don't need to know it on my level, Kev. How you explain it is perfect, because that's how most people are going to understand it, right? I go even simpler than that, and I go, imagine if a lion was chasing you for 16 hours a day. Shoot, for most of you that don't sleep 7 to 8 hours a day and try to justify how you're not tired on 5. Yeah, I know you're not tired on 5, because there's so much of that chemical pumping through your system that your body's making you alert, making you awake. But gradually you're losing performance. You just don't know it. So I've had so many conversations with executives about this. You're high achievers, you're, CEOs, CFOs, whatever it may be, and they're justifying to me at 35, maybe 40, hey man, I'm fine. I can run on this sleep. My energy's good. I'll get a lot done this way. I'm like, you're fine right now.
Mm-hmm.
Give it 5 to 10 years down the road, and you're not going to be. And they argue. And I've been in this industry long enough that they come back down the road and go, Anton, I wish I listened, man. Mm-hmm. How do I fix it? What do I do now? Well, now it's a much longer recovery, but the beautiful part, here's the best part about this all, guys. Your body's amazing. Your body's the most amazing piece of, creation that I think exists out there. And it can recover. It can go back down. You just have to be very intentional with it and understand how much stuff this connects to. Name me a problem that we deal with in the world. Name me a problem that we deal with in general. And I bet you I find you a connection to a root cause of stress one way or another, because that is the greatest epidemic that we're facing. And it's for different reasons in different parts of the world. But stress is killing us as people.
Well, and got to put a plug in here. We have developed an assessment that helps to get to your root cause of where your stress resides, because where my stress resides and Anton's stress reside are different from each other, and yours is different from ours, and so on. But part of what we've done is looked at a way to help you identify not the symptoms that you see on the screen, but that help you find the root of how you get there and begin to take an approach to hitting that. And I appreciate that Hawk has echoed. Very true, Kevin. Homeostasis is not reached with pills. I appreciate the medical community. I've got 3 family members in the medical community, but I always hope and pray and work towards that being my last resort. That, find out how we've been created and work within those directions and guides, because that will be much better overall. So.
And there's so many paths to take until we get to the point of a diagnosis. When we have a diagnosis, usually you're going to need pills, and usually you're going to need some medical interference. When you crash your adrenal glands, which produces the hormone that we're talking about that impacts this cortisol, it's a 1.5-year recovery. 1.5 years. I've had many clients experience this, and obviously not while they were training with me. They came back to me after that. And 1.5 years of not even exercising, because exercise is too much stress on the body. Can you think about that, right? The most healthiest thing that we push out there is exercise and stuff like that, but they can't do it because their body can't handle it, because they stayed in the red, got to the blue for too long, and now their body's in the state. Let's get into the next slide that we get into components, so we can make sure we cover everything. This has probably been one of my favorite conversations, not because of what we're talking about, guys. Your comments make this so much more worth it, because you're so engaging, you're talking about all the great stuff, and we get to answer your questions. But like I said, there's many subcomponents that people have broken this down into, but really when EQ came out, these were the 4. Coleman's emotional intelligence model. There's different variations. Like if you read Brandy Berry's books, he has a similar approach in his EQ 2.0. But we have our self-awareness, we have social awareness, some people will call it relational awareness. Then it moves into what? Self-management, because self-awareness is not enough by itself. Ultimately, emotional intelligence is about self-management, me being able to manage myself, control myself in ways that I need to, in order to what? To have the relationship management as a leader to be effective, as a human to enjoy life better. All of those things connect. So those are kind of the 4 that you see there.
Yeah, it goes back to balance. And the other thing that I had brought to my attention one time, I created a graphic that's in the form of an arrow about developing as a leader and leading your organization and some of that. And one of the astute observations made by someone, my arrow was a straight arrow, mostly because I was not technically adept with the graphics to develop a round arrow. But the point is that this process is not a one and done. It's a cyclical process. It has to become a part of who we are and what we do, and go through this process. If you want a simple concept, something that I challenged folks that are wisdom seekers with me in January was there's a 3-step process. Okay. Disconnect, get away, clear your mind, your circumstances for a time. Depends on your situation, how long a time. But disconnect from noise, things that distract you. Then stop and observe. Once you've disconnected, observe inwardly and outwardly. And then the next step is to go forward and find wisdom in what you've observed. And that means taking steps. That means, okay, I figured out that, I've been doing this, and reality is that's not what I'm designed to be and do. What am I going to do about it? Okay. And take some kind of steps. And Anton mentioned our 10% branding. People probably going 10%. That's a strange thing. Well, what we have developed, and Anton and I both understand that this is key, that what happens with people, we see it individually, organizationally, and one of the funniest, saddest examples of it is people dieting. Okay, they get on this new diet. I can speak to this. I did the Atkins program years ago and literally cut out sugar, carbohydrates from my diet completely. And the problem was with those things is that it's not sustainable. And so you've got to evaluate and consider, is this what is for me? Is this my design? Is this who I should be? And part of the self-awareness is figuring out those on an ongoing basis. And as you gather, in in the military, we make a plan to execute a mission, but from the time we start moving, we're already gathering intel to find out, was our movement the best it could be? What do we need to adjust and change our mission? Same idea. Start with a 10% step, a small step, something that you can sustain. And then as you deal with that and begin to overcome that one step, then you can gather additional intel and additional awareness to consider others. But if you start with 100% all in, jump in, throw out everything, then your likelihood of success is very small, and likely you'll end up in a worse place than when you started. So better to take a 10% approach. Find the most critical area that you need to address and step there. And then and what's interesting, correct me if I'm wrong, Anton, quite often when we start addressing that one priority, others take on a different situation, and it affects the others as well.
If we identify the right 10%, which is why assessment for us is such a big deal, we don't just jump in and start educating people and say, this is the answer for you. Based on what? Based on generalizing everybody for the same problems, same issues. We're very unique and amazing, and we have to figure out what those things are. But you're right, when you fix that 10%, that's the roots. That's at the bottom, right? That's the 10% of the trees, not what you see above with the glory of leaves and branches and all that. It's the stuff underneath that nobody sees, nobody spends the time discovering. And they waste so much time creating even stress trying to fix things. People say to me, what's the best exercise? What's the best diet? What's the best personal development plan? What's the best leadership development plan? The one that you're going to stick with over time. That's my answer across the board. The one that you can stay consistent with. And I'm telling you, if you do that, it's going to be way better for you than Tony Robbins or the biggest guru in the world coming to you and providing you theirs. Because if it just doesn't fit you, it'll be short-lived. You may create short changes, but those are not deep-rooted changes. And with time, a tree sheds its leaves, a tree loses its, I'm looking at a tree right now that's half dead. It lost half of itself. We had some crazy weather or whatever, but that tree lost half of itself. At the root, it didn't change though. Maybe grew a little bit, but didn't change. So, one thing I point out on this graphic though, guys, you have to start with recognition. You have to start with the top. But it doesn't mean you have to start on the left and the right. This is a lot of times that people push and you start with the self and then social. Yes, technically, but sometimes from social, you can learn a lot about yourself. And I'll be a little vulnerable. I'll give you guys a story. And so I've been going through class and some of my classmates I didn't get along with. And initially, for better part of the year, until I took a personal branding class, I was like, well, it's them. It's their fault. I just don't fit in here. Like this is a bad situation. I can't wait to get out. And not until really the last 2 months of it, I started to take a look at the social interactions, the social environment, and recognize some things about myself that had changed over the last 2-3 years that I was blind to because the change was so gradual. Their comments and really looking at that social interaction brought me back to when I was my best self. And I compared myself to that versus how I was feeling now. And I noticed a lot of self things that have shifted that I needed to work on. And through that, I was able to find that self-awareness needed to start to get back on track. But it wasn't without assessing the social environment that allowed me to, to finally get there.
Welcome, Awesome. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Glad to have you. And Hawk, you must be a Navy vet. Thanks for your service. My youngest son's a Navy vet, so I have a special place in my heart for Navy vets. And Hawk makes comment that like Toyota's lean, little steps here, little steps there that lead to big steps. And yes, they are important. And so as you look at this concept that you see the graphic for, don't see it as one time, one way. See it as a cycle, and it's something to become a part of who we are. And what Anton was sharing about blind spots, the value of coaches is if they are good at what they do, they will help you identify your blind spots, not based on their formula, but based on being able to truly assess you, your organization, and go to the root, not the symptoms. Treating symptoms is like taking an aspirin because your head hurts and to find out you got a brain tumor. Mm-hmm. And we don't do that. We won't do that. If that's what people ask us to do, we're going to say no, thank you, because we know that's not successful.
So that leads me perfectly into the next slide, Kev. Go ahead and move there. And it's how to use an EQ, but more importantly, how to teach yourself and others to have EQ. And coaches is one. But what coaches do is they are able to create insights, right? That's that word, insight. You have to start with insight. And it wasn't until Kevin was actually one of these people that helped me provide insight. I did a 360. And I've done many 360s in my life. I've done 360s for others as an executive coach. But the problem with a typical 360 is it usually only involves your coworkers. And I say, if you're going to do a 360 and truly have a 360, not 180, that's only half your life. You have life and you have work. You need to do a complete insight from all people in your life, all types of people, people that you like, people that you don't like, people that, you know, whatever it may be, and really look at it as data. And you can crunch it like data and say, okay, these are the commonalities I'm seeing. I may not agree with them right now, but obviously a lot of people are saying that. So there's something that I have to investigate, something that I have to dive deeper into. So how to teach somebody emotional intelligence is you have to find a way to gather that data for them, whether it be for your team, have them do a group 360, ask 10 different questions about what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, when do you see me at my best, when I'm happy, like not just work related stuff, everything. And some people will give you a lot of great work stuff because they know you in that space. Some people will give you a lot of life stuff because they know you in that space. Don't forget to ask your children, right? If you have them, you may not think their opinion matters, but I trust you. Trust me when I tell you, here's some of the stuff your kids tell you, you're going to open your eyes probably more than anything because all they know is truth. That's all they can say. There's no hidden agenda. They're not worried about saying something. And especially if you say it's anonymous, great. Make sure it's anonymous, guys. That's another component to this. When you're creating these insights, try to create an anonymous way to collect data, collect those insights, because sometimes people may hold back if they know who you are. You know, you're going to find out who said what. So that would be how you start. And from there, have yourself or others identify what are the changes that I want to create based on these insights. And then 10% at a time, apply that change.
I have to talk about the 360. I will offer you an easier one than that. Use our assessment. It's free. It's on our website. Its initial step is 12 questions. It will help you gain some insight and perspective. And it's not just a work assessment. It is not just a life assessment. It is an assessment about our total, you know, the congruent us. And so use that. The second thing that comes to mind, and this is part of the mindset of a servant leader, okay, we think so often we approach people is, well, if they're doing something that is not good for them, not good for the team, whatever, that we see approaching that to address that as a negative, mean behavior, and that it is without EQ. But what I would challenge you to shift your thinking. The greatest thing about EQ is that it's driven, and I know this is, boy, some people are going to go, uh-oh, here we go, kumbaya, all that stuff, but love. And if you know, I everything I do is centered around the motivation of love. but what we think about love is the warm fuzzies, which that's great and so certainly a part. But part of the most loving thing I can do if I truly care about my family, my team, anyone that I'm affiliated with, is to be able to share what I see and do so honestly. Now, the way you balance the IQ, telling the truth, of making the observation, giving the data, is that you also balance with the EQ of I'm ready to walk through this with you. And this is where a servant leader comes in. A servant leader doesn't just throw out, this is, you messed up, this is what you need to do. We say, this is a problem. Let's figure out together how to get you to overcome it. So yeah, we've got to have the balance between the IQ and the EQ and shift our thinking about what it means to help people. And sometimes, again, principles, we operate in principles. Okay. One of the principles is that we got to speak the truth. Anton and I are real good at that. The problem is sometimes we forget that we got to speak the truth with love. And sometimes the love part is a big hug. Sometimes it's a kick in the seat of the pants. And I saw you chuckling. I see Hawk's comment, Kumbaya is a good song. Yeah, I guess sometimes we give it a bad rap. Nothing wrong with Kumbaya. It's just associated with a mindset that some people react to. So.
Well, folks, thank you so much all for joining. We're here, every week. Next week, we have a guest, Wes. He's an HR director for our children's hospital, if I remember correctly, the role. Once in a while, we do want to bring guests, so it's not just me and Kev, talking about things all the time, and really discuss the state of HR and how some of the concepts that we talk about apply. He's been with us before, joined our Human SOS Summit. But Human SOS is something that we're trying to create a movement out of. It's not something that is just a nice thing to say. We've done, 67 shows, 67 weeks in a row, 68 weeks, because one of those was our summit. We're going to keep showing up, and we hope that you help us to spread the message. I appreciate Hawk for tagging people. That's a huge help for us, just exposing our message to other people. It's not about me and Kev, guys. It really is not. If I could not be on the screen, and if I could hide my face and have somebody else be here, I'd be all for that. This is just the capacity that we have to spread Human SOS right now, and it stands for Human Sustainability Operational System. I used to call it organizational system, and you said operational one time, Kevin. I just love that so much better, because we don't operate only in organizations. We operate in life as human beings. We operate as parents, as fathers, mothers, whatever it may be. So if this is something the organization needs, your team needs, let us know. We will find a way to deliver it to you. If cost is a problem and you guys have a low budget, we will figure out a way to work with you, because for us, it's about creating a movement and creating, people that are just evangelical about this, and they want to help to spread the message, and maybe they want to deliver the certifications we'll create in the future. But just reach out. Let's talk. That's all that we want to do.
Welcome, Kenneth. I appreciate you joining us. And yes, to give you an idea, gang, of where our hearts are and our minds are in this. This is episode 67. We have produced 67 hours of information, knowledge, content that is free to any and everyone. In fact, there is a place that we have this curated. You can go to one link and find all 67 hours of this. So if that's all you need to begin to overcome, great. We applaud it. We think, we support you. Okay. Some people, we need to come in and train some of the principles, and we do that. We're accomplished at it. We're confident with it. And then there are some people that are going to take that next level, and that's coaching, whether it's a team, whether it's an individual. But that's what we do. And it's not, we're not motivated to make money, even though we need to make money. Okay, we're motivated as part of a movement to change things for the better for those that are out there. And please contact us. Anton, I think we're still offering that somebody takes the assessment and they would like an interpretation of that assessment, that we will do that, especially if you do this with your team, give them the assessment, and then you want us to do that. We will even give you a 30 to 45 minute interpretation of the results. So we're in this to one day make a living, but bigger is to start a movement to really change things for the better for the world around us. It's part of Anton and I's vision, and that is bigger than both of us. And so we hope you'll jump in with us. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back next Tuesday. We're going to hit what, Anton?
Next week we'll be with Wes. I got to look.
That's right.
Yeah.
We'll have special guests, and so join us, please. And thank you for the interaction, the engagement, because that makes for such a better time spent than just Anton and I talking. So thank you for that. Look forward to seeing you next week. God bless, and have just an absolutely amazing week going forward. See you next Tuesday.
Bye, guys.